All right, so thanks for coming, everyone. It looks like we've been having a good session, so I'm going to go ahead and get us kicked off here, and then I'm going to pass it over to the Varonis team. So brief introduction on Nth Generation and myself. So we are a 27-year-old solution provider focused solely in Southern California. So headquarters in RB, another office up here in the Twin Towers, and I am Director of Security and Analytics for our team. So came on board about 7.5 years ago to stand up yet my third security practice. So I've been doing this a long time, started in '94, made the cover of Forbes with Jeff Moss. Dark Tangent, as you may know, runs Black Hat and DEF CON. So been in the space a very long time. It's been an interesting ride. So just wanted to speak briefly about some of our service offerings. I think we bring some unique value props to the table. So I lead a team of 5. Pretty much everyone on my team has been a previous CISO and at minimum at least 10 years experience. So like I said, I've been doing this since '94. So it's been quite an interesting ride. So unlike many of the other consultancies you may see out there that bring senior level talent to the sales engagement, yet bring people from college to the actual engagement, when you speak to myself or one of my peers, you're going to be riding along with a senior executive the entire time. So wanted to mention a few of the primary services we offer. We, needless to say, sell a lot of solutions as well, but we primarily are service driven. We are interested in what our customers' needs are and help back into those as opposed to just trying to sell the shiny new object of the quarter. So one of the things that we have been doing a lot with lately is what we call a virtual CISO. So as many of you are probably aware and dealing with, the budget for a 250 plus K CISO to sit on your board and have executive level discussions around security may not be within inside of your budget or requirements, and so we come on board basically at a fraction of that. So I heard a really interesting session earlier today about the NIST Cyber Security Framework. That is one of the many frameworks that we use depending on our organization that we're working with. So if they're highly regulated, we tend to lean towards something like NIST. If they're not necessarily so highly regulated and maybe more immature, we use a lot of the CIS top 20 work. So a lot of stuff happening there. Doing a lot of pen tests, social engineering, things of that nature as well. I did bring up just a couple toys to show you. Obviously around cocktails we can play with them a little bit more, but you'll see that the types of work that my team and I do are kind of above and beyond what a lot of the other organizations do. So you've probably never seen anything like this, but this is used to breach internal doors very rapidly. Same thing as this, it's called a hall pass. It's really fun to play with on physical and red team engagements. And then these are these little flexible cards that are pretty interesting that if you're ever familiar with, like on a bathroom door, there's generally molding that makes it to where you can't see the shackle. With something like this, we're able to quickly breach those. So one of the things we bring to the table is I'm just about certified locksmith now. So we do a lot of blended attacks. So some people will do like social engineering or external vulnerability assessment and pen test, but they don't necessarily blend it, meaning that they don't necessarily take the results of the phishing scam and your credentials to try to engage in the environment, whereas we're after the jewels just like an attacker is. So we definitely kick it up a couple notches. A lot of risk assessments and things around business impact assessments, disaster recovery, business continuity. So again, if you don't, one of the first things you should know is, what your assets are, both from a software as well as a hardware perspective. And so we do a lot of work around understanding from a business perspective, what are the primary services, what are the critical assets they need in order to execute those services, and then often build the disaster recovery and business continuity strategies around that. A lot of social engineering as well. So, I'd say the last couple of years we've seen a lot of ransomware. People have kind of moved off, and the two primary things we're seeing today are phishing scams, just basically allowing them to land and remain on the environment. And then the other thing we're seeing a lot these days is where they're actually taking over the data center and using that for Bitcoin mining. So as opposed to dealing with ransomware, they're like, I'll just let you use your computing sources to make me money. So we're seeing more and more of that these days. Like I mentioned, a lot of red team assessments as well. So we spend a lot of time breaking into the computers, but we're also breaking into the people as well as the physical buildings themselves. So when we do those types of engagements, it's basically anything non-destructional or that doesn't create a safety hazard is fair game. So sitting in drop ceilings, tailgating, posing as other individuals, making fake badges, it's pretty fun stuff. Security roadmaps, doing a lot of these days as well. So whether it's because you just want an external independent party to help you align your priorities, or if it's maybe you don't necessarily have the internal talent to really understand what to put first, we'll come in and do gap assessments. So those could be generic roadmaps aligned with something like NIST or the CIS frameworks. Equally, they could be PCI assessments, HIPAA assessments, GDPR assessments, things of that nature. And finally, I'll also mention the ISO gap assessments. We're seeing more and more focus around these highly structured frameworks. So something like the CIS Top 20 is relatively lightweight in comparison to something like ISO, but we're seeing, boards being more and more concerned about security, having less risk tolerance, and so we're seeing a lot of adoption of these frameworks and movement towards really trying to mature the organizations. With that being said, I would say Varonis is definitely one of the huge product plays for us, and I don't want to steal their thunder, but one of the things where we find a lot of risk is related to all that unstructured data, so things out on SharePoint and email and all your file shares. There's a lot of risks there that often organizations don't really have visibility into, and Varonis is definitely going to hit hard and solid for you on that. So with that, I am going to pass it over to Travis.
Thank you, Jeremy. Appreciate it. Hi, my name is Travis Bennett. I'm with Varonis, and Jeremy and I cover the Southern California region for state, local, and education. And today we're going to be talking about sea turtles. Yay. All right, so what we're going to do today is I'm sure you guys have been in a bunch of presentations already and probably sat through a bunch of slide decks. So we're going to switch it up a little bit. We're going to kind of give you a little bit of a background on Varonis, and then we're actually going to show the technology. So it might be a little bit keep you awake a little bit longer. So let's continue here. So what can sea turtles teach us about data security? Kind of a lot, it turns out. Sea turtles reproduce in an interesting way. Females find a dark, quiet beach and bury their eggs. When eggs hatch, the baby turtles pop out and on the sand and make their way towards the sea by instinctively following moonlight, which reflects off the surface. They trust that following the light will lead them to safety, and for most of history, that's been true. These days, it's not that simple. Artificial light, like a street light on a nearby road, for example, can confuse a baby turtle, lead them anywhere but the safety of the ocean, and will often mean their demise. Trust is the biggest light, ends up causing their death. So we've been following the brightest lights when it comes to data security, right? We shine a light on your seams, thinking it might put enough there. We'll be able to see the threats. Antivirus, next generation endpoint protection on all the devices, but the attacks still get in, as we know. So strong UBA is a light that's only as strong as the behavior actually giving it. And well, let me go down a little bit here. All right, actually, let me just go to the next slide. So in terms of workstations, application, Active Directory, mobile devices, networking, and if you think about like some of the recent breaches, like the Equifax breach, the lights aren't in the right places. There's a significant amount of data breaches every week these days, and Equifax is one of the biggest ones last year. And if you're looking at what that breach was all about, it's really unstructured data, right? Files and email shares. And that's the type of stuff we just don't have visibility into today. OPM is another one, massive breach. And so what Varonis does, and I'm going to let Jeremy jump in here and kind of give you a little bit about why we're looking behind the curtains on some of your big core data assets, right? And a lot of that is, like Jeremy said before, identifying where your critical assets are and how do we actually wrap context around your data. So Jeremy, if you want to jump in here.
So why do insiders and outsider attackers keep hitting file systems? Why does this keep happening? It's because the data is dark. Think about the questions you should be able to answer if your data is secure. Where's my sensitive data? Where is it exposed? Who's got access to what? What's being used and by whom? Is it stale? Can it be rid of? And who are the data owners? What's worse is what do we do when something does go wrong? So where are we shining the light? To keep the data safe, our brightest light needs to be on the data itself. And I'm actually going to show you the demo before we go into this part here.
Yeah, so while we're setting this up, what's interesting about Varonis is the fact that we're actually looking inside of the core data assets, and we're doing a couple key things which we're going to touch on. Is one, understanding first, where does your sensitive data sit, right? Let's do a scan of that, find out where your assets are. If you think about data like money, it's kind of the same thing, right? You want to know, hey, where does that data sit? If you're thinking about a bank, where does that cash sit, right? And if you're thinking about data the same way, it's okay, how do we identify where that is? The next question is, well, who has access to it, right? You want to figure out what members in your company actually have access to that data. What are they doing with it? How do we put an audit log around that data? And then next is, most importantly, how do we alert IT when there's anomalies in that data, right? So what we're going to do is actually show you a little bit about how Varonis is able to scan it, identify the sensitive data, map that back to what people have access to it, and how do we help clean that up, right?
Yeah, I'm just loading up the VM here. So this is the main component of Varonis. And what's unique about this is the different platforms we support. You can see everything ranging from directory services, Exchange, NetApp, Office 365, SharePoint. You have a single pane of glass view as far as permission visibility, auditing, and some other things I'll show you shortly. What this area is good for is if you're trying to figure out what a user has access to across various platforms. It can be pretty difficult without having something in place. So just a few clicks here, I'm going to look up Alan. And what it's going to do is going to highlight what Alan has access to across his file server in green. It's going to show you what permissions that user has on that particular folder and how they're getting those permissions. Over here we have a hit count. That's just showing the sensitive files found within those directories that this user has access to. On any of these folders, you can actually click on them and it'll list out what users have access, what security groups, and what permissions they have. What's more interesting though, and this is kind of going into our profiling of users, is our ability to identify users that are oversubscribed. So you might have some users in your environment that have been there for 10 years or so. They've moved from different departments. They've been added to projects temporarily, but a lot of times, security folks, when they grant these permissions, they never go back to clean it up. And what ends up happening is a lot of users just have too much access and they get breached one way or another. It could be ransomware, insider threat, and then you have a bigger problem. But what we're seeing here is Varonis is identifying those users for you. So Andrew here has been touching his finance folder for a while. So you can see these red X's start to form on these users. And if you click on Andrew, it's going to show you everything across not just his file server, but across SharePoint, across OneDrive. Anything that he has access to is not using, it's going to show you visually where it is and also allow you to remove it directly from Varonis. Another feature, which is still one of my favorites, is the modeling feature. Say if you're in your environment and you ran across, or you just did a risk assessment with us, And you identified a folder that shouldn't have global access to it. You found there is 14,000 hits of sensitive data. We have predefined rules for like HIPAA, PCI, and a bunch of other compliances. And now there's a concern, but you don't know where to start. You know, how do I clean that up without breaking users' access? Well, what I could do with Varonis here is I actually can simulate the removal of the everyone group to see who will be impacted by that change. So you can imagine if you had a couple thousand users and you didn't know who was actually accessing this folder, you just can't rip it out. So this is going to go back and look through the audit trail, and then it's going to show you exactly which users are accessing that share through that everyone group. So then you have this short list, which will be over here, and you actually could continue your modeling. So you can create another security group, throw these individuals into it, but you might find one here is, why isn't Dan in here? You know, why was Dan going into legal? So now it's easily identified an issue, and also you're able to clean up those permissions. Sure.
So I'm sure if folks in this room that are in cybersecurity or deal with permissions or infrastructure at some level, permission access is always a big problem, right? You're thinking about Windows file shares, you're thinking about your unstructured data. The big question is, where does the sensitive data sit, right? If you look at the breaches like I brought up before, it's all around a lot of the files and emails. So what Varonis is doing is helping identify what users should have access and, more importantly, who shouldn't have access. Another big tool of Varonis that we kind of just deployed, and it's been massively successful, is automatically going through your unstructured data and cleaning up global access groups and broken ACLs. So if you think about how long that might take an individual person to do one folder, Varonis can automate that entire process and clean that up within a matter of hours and days, which is amazing. So if you're looking at how do we mitigate the risk on some of our biggest data sets, that's a great way to do it. It's a great way to start right there.
So yeah, a good example would be, we had a customer that if they were to do it manually, you know, we have a way to calculate how many days it would take. It would take them 4,000 days to clean up their broken permissions and their global access issues. With an automation tool, it would take 40. So pretty significant. What I'm touching here is statistics. This is good for a lot of different things. It can help you identify data owners. You can set data owners within Varonis as well, but it's also there if you need to figure out like what is hogging up your resources on your SAN or your NAS. We've had customers where 98% of their activity on their ice were actually service accounts, and they didn't know that until just doing a risk assessment. This is our audit log. So, you know, we looked at the permissions that Alan had earlier, but you could also go in here and see what Alan's been doing with his access pretty easily. So I'm gonna go search for him. And you can do this with security groups, global groups, and basically it'll show you everything that user's doing across Exchange, across the SharePoint environment, the filer, and it makes it look easy. You know, trying to get this data otherwise is, you know, could be a headache if you're doing like native auditing for Windows. You'll try to go in there and make use of it, but you end up just spinning your wheels. This is fully reportable, customizable. You could customize your reports and save them to templates.
More than just auditing, it's accountability on the data, right? You want to know who's doing what with our data. This is a great way to identify that, whether it's forensics or if somebody calls up IT and says, hey, I deleted a file, something as simple as that. This is accountability on their data, right? We're capturing every file event as well as events in Active Directory as well across multiple platforms, which is, you know.
Right, kind of ties it all together. So you can see the authentication events, where that account was enabled, what they did after that account was enabled. It'll all be in the audit trail. We have taken it a step further, though. You know, that might not be enough. You know, say if someone deleted something in finance, You can easily search for that, find it, but say moving forward, you want to be alerted about that. And you want to be alerted only when it's sensitive data. So what we built on top of this is our data alerts platform, where I can just create my own alert, custom tailor it to what I want it to do. And it's got a lot of filters. You can add, exclude people. But it kind of gives you that extra layer of functionality that is really nice. In addition to getting alerts, and this comes into play with our UBA and some of our threat models designed against ransomware, is you actually could take action on this. So say if one of your file servers got hit with ransomware, and instead of coming back Monday morning when half the things are working, you actually could have shut down an account, disabled that user's computer, or actually taken action. Varonis could do that. So these are the different threat models we have. They range from the pure mechanics of something changing that's a normal. So say there's a user that works 9 to 5, and then one day at 2 a.m. on a Saturday, all of a sudden they're utilizing all their drives, or their account's been compromised, or they're doing something abnormal. Since we know what normal is, we're able to alert you on activity that's just different. So it could be the computer's been hijacked, or there's some README files being dropped up under that account. We're able to pick it up pretty easily. All these alerts actually get fed into our new data alert dashboard. So you have a dashboard where you can go and review these on a daily basis, or if you need to get additional insight into a particular event that occurred. And I apologize for the marketing names here, but it's just to give you an idea of what we're looking for. Say disgruntled Dan here has 3 different threat models fire off. One, he was going to idle and stale data. He was doing things for the very first time, and we're able to pick up on that type of activity. Similar with an abusive admin. It might be admin goes and enables an account temporarily, throws that account in a security group, goes in, accesses data that account normally doesn't touch, that backs out of it within a couple minutes. That's going to flag a threat, and that's definitely going to show up on the dashboard and alert you on it. So I could drill down into any of these and actually investigate the threat models that fired off.
And the data in question as well.
Right, what was impacted. So right here I got a threat model increase to idle and sensitive data. I'm going to go ahead and drill down into that. And here's my alert. So it's going to give me additional info of, what is this threat model? Why is it triggered? Under some of the insights, you're going to see if the user's under a watch list, if it's an account that's been disabled or deleted, if it's a privileged account. It could be an executive or a service account, so it's going to give you insight of that. It's going to show you if it was a device that was the first time that user touched. So if an account all of a sudden started going into computers they never logged into before, you're going to get alerted. Scrolling down here is going to show you the assets that were impacted. So there's 84 here. If it was previously touched, if it's sensitive or not. And then there's also a timestamp. And in here you can see which files are impacted by that incident. And then you're also able to export this out to a report.
Okay. And one of the last things we're going to show here is, so Varonis does a free risk assessment, right, on your unstructured data. Very easy to install. And what we're going to show are, what's our risky areas on the file shares, right, or whatever environment we're looking at. And we used to deliver these in a risk assessment report. But what's really nice is this dashboard, these KPIs, we're just delivering to you guys. So within a matter of 24 hours, 48 hours, you're going to have some of these insights. And it's really like, what do we really need to know about our file shares, right? What are our risky areas? Where do we start with Varonis? And this is a great way to do it, right? So we're looking at, what's the number of sensitive files with open access, right? That's a pretty big one. Number of sensitive files or sensitive folders with open access. How much stale data do we have out there? How much stale data that is sensitive? If you think about that, right, that's great stuff. You could actually just start purging off of tier 1 storage. And it is a pretty big security risk, right? If somebody gets breached. But this is a great way to kind of just come in here and say, hey, how many broken ACLs do we have? How many unresolved SIDs, an Active Directory? How many users with unexpiring passwords? These are all security loopholes that otherwise you just don't have visibility into. You can start cleaning up and really mitigating that risk immediately in the file shares, or unstructured data for that matter. Was there anything else we wanted to show? I think that's it. Any questions? I know this was kind of a lot to go over. Might have been a little bit hard to see from all the way back there, but any questions from the audience?
Does your tool classify data? Can you tag it and apply a classification to it and all the restricted access?
Yeah, so we have our data classification tool we've had for about a decade now. So it's just as simple as turning on whatever rules you might have compliance or regulatory demands against. And we're going to scan into the files, the Word document spreadsheets, and tell you how much of that data is sitting in each folder. And you can drill down, analyze it, and we're going to give you a hit count. What's nice is we also have a report that says, okay, well, here's your sensitive data. This is who has access to it. And this might be the ones that are open to global access groups, for example. Might be a good way to start, yeah. Great question, thank you. Anybody else? All right, I think we are good to go. Jeromie, both Jeromies, I guess, anything? All right, guys, thank you so much for the presentation, appreciate it. Yep, and like we said, if you guys want a free risk assessment, Varonis offers it, definitely through Nth Generation, and great way to kind of see some visibility on your unstructured data sets. So thank you.